Hey everyone, this is Ellie Mae with Swift Crate Customs, and today I wanted to share some testing and my tips for getting started with etching with the Siser Juliet and Romeo. Make sure to check the description below this video for updated information. Things will change, and I'll be sharing some things that are in the beta software currently right now. So this was my first test. I used a simple shape of a heart, and I'm testing on a silhouette metal etching sheet to start with. I used the fills, which is located in the bottom toolbar on Build Contours. And then you want to make sure to choose the right designation when you go to send this to the machine, because the three different options give you three different areas that it's going to send that design. So you want to make sure that you understand how those work. My first test, I am using the settings here. I set up a new setting for a metal sheet, and I started with a force of 10. I'll tell you right now that did not work, but it is the way to start testing with blanks. Every blank is going to vary in the thickness, and we'll talk more about that. You want to secure your blank very carefully to your cutting mat. You do not want it to move, and then you want to set the blade tip at the point of origin or the starting point. And this is where it's very important that you understand the three designations on how it is sent from the software. So I sent this one to etch, and it did not work, but that's okay. It is a test. This whole sheet, I already knew going into it, was going to be a test sheet. So it is doing the design that I set up. It didn't work, so I set that up again to etch with a different fill, and I sent that to the machine. And then I have my second test. I changed the force here to a force of 60 for my next test, and I saved that setting as well. And then I sent this to the machine to do that second test. Because it is starting at the point of origin and I have told it to use the exact location when I sent it, it is going to go back. I am not unloading my mat each time, and I'll explain that here as we go along. All etching will create some sort of dust because you are taking something away. So here's what I just wiped off. This is a silhouette metal etching sheet. This is a first test. So I used a fill, and it did a fairly decent job. This here was a test at 10 force. This was 60 force. So much better job, and it's not a complete fill. I just used a default. So I am going to continue testing. Now, back in the Leonardo Design Studio software, I made a copy of my original heart. I added a fill to this. My favorite is the Crosshatched fill at the lowest spacing. That's just what I've done for years, and I like that result. And you can see the machine in action here. It is sped up, of course, but it is completing that cross-hatched pattern in the way it feels is the best method. So it may not make sense to you, but if you just let it go, then it will work. Now, another thing I will state here is if you are doing a long etch, I would recommend plugging it in by USB. If you lose Wi-Fi connection, it's a dud. Okay, so I've done a second etch. I do not want to unload the mat because I want it to stay in the same position. So I'm just going to bring you around to the back side, and you can see my test. So this one looks a little bit different, and some of this is just that dust from etching. So you are going to get dust in that etching. So let's go over this again because I messed up the first time. This one here, which is hard to see, was a force 10. It didn't work. This one is a force 60, and I thought I had a really large fill, but I actually didn't. This is the lowest fill that it will go. I'm going to take this sheet of lint roller and just pick up this dust so you can see all of that dust. And then you would have to, and now it's stuck to my mat. I'm trying not to move that mat. So showing a test as it's in process. So if I just take my hand and rub over that, you can see that that dust is in there. But you do have the pattern, if my camera will focus here. you can see the pattern. So this is a crosshatch pattern at the lowest fill option that it will go. So the best thing you can do is test, which is exactly what I'm doing here. I just used a shape from the LDS library, and then I'm going to fill this metal etching sheet with that test to see all the different fills and the spacing. Now back to the Leonardo Design Studio software, and I'm just making copies. And originally I had decided I was going to try to fill the whole thing with the hearts. And you'll see here that I ended up changing my mind. But I'm just copying and pasting and making those shapes. When you use the same shape over again, it is a great way to see how those fills are going to behave and see what they look like. So I was really impressed with one of the fills. The rays was pretty cool. You'll see that here in the end when we get done. But I'm just selecting each one of these, decided to delete the small ones, and I'm adding this fill. Now what you also notice is there's two levels of fills. One is for basic users, and one is the premium fill patterns are going to be for the Leonardo Design Studio Pro users. I use the crosshatched fill pattern, as I mentioned before. That is my favorite. The others are pretty cool though. This rays that was shown on the screen just briefly there, we'll see that at the end. And then I sent those to etch, and I ended up with using just the top 2 rows. And here's a look at that etch fill test process. So you can see the 3 that I already have at the top. I am doing the same exact thing every time I do this. I did not unload the cutting mat because I wanted it to go back to the same exact location every single time. So if you have it return to the point of origin, then it will start at that same point of origin. If you unload it and you try to load it yourself again and get it to the exact point, you may be off just a little bit. So I knew this was a test going into it, and it's going to complete these etch fills in the pattern that it feels is the most efficient. It may not make sense to you, but I just let it do its thing. Okay, so here's a quick look at the other etch fills that I've done. Again, I'm going to use the space. You can kind of see this one's a little bit odd. We'll see what it looks like when I get it cleaned up, and I'll take a final photo. But I wanted to share the process that I go through when I am testing different things. That little starburst looks kind of cool. I don't want to remove the mat yet, just because I want it to be able to etch in the same spot and fill up that space on that sheet. Now here's a look in the Leonardo Design Studio software. I typed out some text. I added a very heavy etch fill to it. What I want to point out here is that there is a delay because of the amount of data that you have asked the software to process and to send to the machine. I did report that to Siser, but think about this. Every single line that you added is a cut line. That is a lot more data than just a simple SVG cut. So it did take a little bit to process. Do not get click happy and be patient. So here's a look as it is being etched. It does take time for the etch to work, and it will depend on your blank and the speed you have set. High speed is not always great. So here's a look as it was finished before I cleaned it up. I used a lint roller to remove that etching dust. You do not want to blow on it. You do not want to inhale it or get it in your eyes, whatever the material is that you are etching. So you can see there are tool marks because it is a metal on metal tool. You can also see there I have a drag mark. I did figure out how to fix that later on down the road, but here's a look at those etch fills. Now, here's the finished look after I cleaned it up before I removed it from the cutting mat. And then I grabbed another blank. I will have all the links in the description below for the blanks that I have tested along the way. And I want to point out a couple things here. I secured this in the portrait mode, so 5x7, it was the 7-inch length, and what I found was that it did affect how it was in the machine. So I am showing the bottom left point of origin for this 5x7 that is in the portrait orientation. This is going to be very important for your blanks. If your mat is not completely flat, when that tool travels, as you saw on my previous blank with the drag mark, I found out this blank is thicker than the other blank. I had to adjust my tool, And then I found that it lifted my mat in the middle. Because of the 5x7 was in portrait mode, it was heavier. So you can see here my mat is bubbled up. Any place that your mat is higher, that tool is going to scratch when it travels. So you can see that the mat is not completely flat here. There are a couple things that you can do. First off, I changed the orientation of my blank, which means that I just rotated my design when I go to send it. A mat hanging down in the back also can cause that. So I was showing here, I lifted up the back, and this is what the front looks like. So when I lifted that back up, it made that mat flat as well. So then I supported my cutting mat, and it helped flatten out that mat so the tool was not going to drag as it was traveling back and forth. Then I set it up in the machine again. Now I set up the blade for the point of origin, and I'm going to use the camera to set the exact point of origin. There's a link in the description below that I'll add once that video is ready on the detailed steps to do that. So I used the camera so I had the exact point of origin, and then here is the design that I am going to send in the software. Now this time when I go to send it, I'm going to choose Advanced to End of Cut. That is going to place the blade housing at the top of the design instead of Return to Point of Origin. That can help with your drag marks as well, so it's not going all the way back across your blank. In this case, I screwed up. I sent it with the wrong designation on the Send tab, and it did not etch in the location I wanted it to. That was complete user error, so I just simply realized that when I did, it wasn't going to work, so I just stopped the job, and then I added a new metal etching sheet to the mat and secured it, and then set the point of origin with the camera as well. Again, links in the description below for steps on how to do that. Now here is a real-time look, and I'm going to be talking over the machine. This is, keep in mind, over a microphone. As you'll notice as the video, when I move around the back of the machine, the sound changes. It is a metal tip on a metal sheet. That is going to affect it as well as your design. But you can see here, I have that supported. It is fully flat on the machine for it to work properly. And a look as it's finishing up the etch process, it did take about 50 minutes for it to complete this entire etch. Now here is my first successful full 5x7 etch. The duds before are over here. It was not the machine's fault. 100% user error. It's going to take time and practice. But here is my finished etch. You can see all of this metal etching dust. You want to make sure to clean this up. You do not want to blow on it and get it into the air. I did have my blade go to not back to point of origin, but to the top of the design, because I noticed on my test that when my design finished here and I returned to point of origin, when it did, it dragged a mark back to the point of origin. So it actually etched, and that is due to the way the mat curves. So this time I sent it to the top of the design, which is something you set up when you send the design to etch. So this is set up, and I'm going to clean it up and then remove it from the cutting mat. I'm going to take a lint roller and just roll the dust off. And this will get most of it. And then what I'll do, since it's a metal etching sheet, I will take it and wash it. But you can see how much dust that creates on this metal etch sheet. And what it's doing basically is it's removing the paint color off of this anodized metal. So now here's a closer look. We'll get the camera to focus a bit. There is a little bit closer look. And you do see those etch tool marks. And it just depends on how you are looking at it, on how it shows up. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this and wash it, and then I'll share a finished photo. So here's a look after it's been washed. Let's see if I can get the lighting in here a little bit better. There's a look at the cleaned design. Something to keep in mind is that any additional dust that you do not clean off, if it gets on your cutting mat, it's going to be stuck very well. So you can try to remove that with a lint roller as well. I'm going to clean off that lint roller and then try it again, but you are going to use mats, and there's two ways. So I demonstrated using painter's tape to secure it because this mat is still fairly sticky, but you can also use a double-sided sticky tape to secure your blanks. Now this is not going to come off of your cutting mat, and it will affect the thickness of your blank because it is an additional layer between your mat and your blank. If you start layering the double-sided stick adhesive onto the cutting mat, that's going to also create an uneven surface. So you're just going to have to experiment with that and play around with it. Here's a look at the finished etchings that I did in my testing. All the links are in the description below for additional information. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click that bell for notifications. Thanks for joining me, and have a great day.